Sophia had always been different. While the other children in her small Midwestern town spent their weekends at football games or hanging around the mall, she spent hers lying on her stomach in the fields behind her grandfather's farm, staring down the scope of an old hunting rifle. The gun was heavy for her frame back then, and her shots often went wide, but there was something intoxicating about the challenge. She loved the discipline, the patience, the quiet calculation that went into pressing the trigger at the exact right moment. Her grandfather, a retired Vietnam veteran, was the only one who ever encouraged her. He would kneel beside her, guiding her breathing, explaining how even the slightest pull on the trigger could send a bullet drifting off course. He told her stories of marksmen he'd served with, men who could hit a coin from hundreds of yards away. To young Sophia, those tales weren't just stories. They were promises of what she could become. But outside that farm, the world was less forgiving. At school, her classmates laughed whenever she mentioned her dream of becoming one of the best long-range shooters in America. "You?" they sneered. "You can't even throw a football straight. How are you supposed to fire a sniper rifle?" Even her closest friends dismissed it as a phase, something she would grow out of once she discovered more appropriate ambitions. Teachers smiled politely, but encouraged her toward nursing or teaching jobs they thought suited her soft voice and small build. Sophia smiled back, but inside she felt something else, a rising defiance. As she grew older, she joined a local shooting club, thinking perhaps there she would finally be taken seriously. The first day she walked in, every head turned. Rows of men, broad-shouldered, loud, and self-assured, looked her over as though she had walked into the wrong building. One of them chuckled audibly. "Sweetheart," he said, "the beauty pageant is down the road. This is for shooters." Laughter rolled across the room. Sophia bit her lip, but said nothing. She paid her fee, signed her name, and took her spot on the firing line. When she shouldered the club's loaner rifle, the men exchanged knowing looks, as if waiting for the comedy show to begin. Her first shot went wide. They snickered. The second missed as well. By the third, one of them clapped sarcastically, muttering, "Guess she's decorating the dirt today." That night, Sophia went home humiliated, but not broken. She replayed every moment in her mind, the way she flinched at the recoil, the way her breathing faltered just before the trigger pull. Instead of collapsing into self-doubt, she opened her notebook and began scribbling. Angles, distances, calculations of bullet drop, wind drift, humidity. She wrote everything she remembered seeing on the range. She wasn't just going to get better. She was going to master this. Her mother worried. "Sophia, you spend more time with that rifle than with people," she said gently over dinner. "Why don't you do something normal for a girl your age?" Sophia smiled faintly. "Mom, this is normal for me." She began spending long hours in solitude, training in places others never bothered to go. She hiked into hills, set up makeshift targets, and practiced until her arms ached. She learned to shoot prone, kneeling, standing, studying every position until it felt like second nature. She read books on physics and aerodynamics, taught herself how different grains of ammunition behaved, and even built her own wing meters from spare parts. Still, whenever she returned to the club, the ridicule followed her. The men didn't see improvement. They only saw someone who didn't look the part. "You're wasting your time," one instructor told her bluntly. "Sniping's a man's game. It takes strength, endurance, focus, things you won't last long at." Sophia didn't argue. She just nodded, went home, and doubled her training. The more they laughed, the harder she worked. By her late teens, Sophia's skills had sharpened considerably. Alone, she could strike targets at distances that once seemed impossible. She had taught herself to remain calm under pressure, to slow her heartbeat until each shot felt like an extension of her body. She no longer saw the rifle as a tool, but as a part of herself, an extension of her will. Yet still, outside eyes refused to see her. At local competitions, organizers introduced her almost apologetically, as if her presence was a novelty act. Spectators whispered bets on how fast she would fail. Opponents barely concealed their smirks. She was, to them, a joke. But Sophia wasn't chasing their approval. Deep down, she had stopped caring what they thought. What she wanted was not applause, but proof that skill, discipline, and relentless effort could silence even the loudest doubters. And so, in the stillness of dawn or the fading light of dusk, she trained when no one was watching. Each sunrise brought another chance to refine her aim, to correct her mistakes, to shave fractions of error from every shot. She learned to measure success not by the sound of cheers, but by the quiet thud of a bullet meeting its target. In those hours alone, lying in the grass with dew soaking her clothes, she discovered something greater than ambition. She discovered peace. The world disappeared when she looked through the scope. Every breath was a rhythm, every heartbeat a reminder of patience. For Sophia, sniping wasn't just a skill, it was a calling. Still, the laughter echoed in the background. At family gatherings, relatives teased her. At work, coworkers raised eyebrows when she mentioned her weekend plans. Why not try something easier? They asked. But Sophia knew there was no going back. The path she'd chosen was difficult, lonely, and filled with doubt. But it was hers. And though no one else realized it yet, every mocking smile, every dismissive word, every laugh behind her back was pushing her closer to the day when all of it would stop. Because deep within, Sophia was preparing for the moment when the girl no one took seriously would become the woman no one could ignore. Sophia's return to the shooting club after months of quiet training felt different. She wasn't the same girl who once fumbled nervously with a borrowed rifle. Her grip was steadier now, her breathing controlled, and her eyes held a sharper focus. She carried herself with quiet confidence, though she knew the men inside hadn't changed. And she was right. The moment she stepped onto the range, the smirks began. One man nudged another with his elbow and whispered loudly, "Here comes the he." "Show." Another chuckled. "Hope someone has a camera. This'll be good for laughs." The range master sighed, shaking his head. "You again?" he muttered, as though she were a stubborn problem refusing to go away. Sophia ignored them. She unpacked her gear carefully, laid out her ammunition in neat rows, and adjusted her ear protection. Every movement was deliberate, calm. She wanted to show them she belonged, not with words, but with actions. Her first shot rang out closer than before, but still shy of the bullseye. Snickers erupted. Someone clapped mockingly. "Oh, she's improving. Soon she'll be able to hit the paper." Heat rushed to Sophia's cheeks, but she forced herself to stay calm. She reloaded, adjusted her scope, and tried again. Another near miss. More laughter. The mockery wasn't just casual, it was relentless. Every missed shot was met with exaggerated gasps or sarcastic cheers. When she tried to ask an instructor for feedback, he waved her off. "Practice more, or maybe find a hobby you're better at." The sting of dismissal was sharper than the sound of laughter. At home, the weight of those voices followed her. She sat at her desk, notebook spread open, replaying every failure. She mapped out wind direction, bullet trajectory, and the angles she misjudged. She circled numbers, underlined calculations, and scribbled reminders to herself in bold. Steady. Grip. Slow breath. Smoother trigger pull. Where others would have given up, Sophia grew obsessed. She spent weekends in isolation, training in places far from the club's laughter. Sometimes she shot until her shoulder throbbed. Sometimes until her fingers blistered from reloading. She wasn't competing against anyone else anymore. She was competing against the girl she had been yesterday. But the mockery didn't stop Dot at local matches. Men chuckled as she walked to her firing position. One competitor leaned toward another and whispered loudly enough for her to hear, "What's next? Cheerleaders with sniper rifles?" Another added, "Maybe she's here to distract us, not shoot." The jokes rolled off them easily, like sport. During one event, after a shaky round, a man approached her with a grin that wasn't friendly. "Listen," he said, "this stuff isn't for everyone. You're wasting money and bullets. Why don't you leave the heavy rifles to us and stick to something smaller? A .22 maybe?" Sophia smiled politely, but inside, fire burned. She wanted to snap back, to defend herself, but she remembered her grandfather's words, "Prove them wrong by doing, not by arguing." So she did. Instead of retreating, she pushed harder. She woke before dawn to practice in the cold, when her hands stiffened, teaching herself to maintain control, even in discomfort. She shot in the wind and rain, learning to read nature like a second language. She set up targets farther and farther away, forcing herself to calculate not just angles but patience. Each failure became a lesson. Each insult became fuel. Yet, even as her skill improved, the ridicule followed her like a shadow. She noticed how competitors would deliberately shoot before her, exaggerating their hits as if to remind her of the gulf between them. Judges rarely called her name with respect. When she landed a good shot, people muttered it was luck. At a small town competition, Sophia placed in the middle of the pack, far from last, but not yet among the top. For her, it was progress. For them, it was ammunition for ridicule. "See?" one man laughed. "She's average at best. And that's on a good day." Sophia didn't argue. She smiled faintly, packed her gear, and went home. But that night, she stayed awake until sunrise, reviewing every mistake from the match. She replayed each shot in her mind, noting where she lost focus, where she could improve. Sleep could wait. Progress could not. Her family noticed the toll. Her mother grew more concerned, gently urging her to step back. "You can't keep letting their words push you this hard," she said one evening. "You'll break yourself." But Sophia shook her head. "No, Mom, their words aren't breaking me, they're shaping me." At work, coworkers laughed when she told them about her weekend routines. "What are you training for? The Olympics?" One joked. Another teased, "Careful, she might snipe us if we forget her birthday." She laughed along outwardly, but inwardly she stored every comment in the same place. She stored the range jokes. Fuel tank for her determination. It was lonely, being the only one who believed in her. But loneliness became her training partner. Her discipline grew sharper with each passing month. She no longer flinched at mockery. Instead, she had trained herself to treat every laugh like background noise, irrelevant against the sound of her rifle. She had taught herself to stay so focused that nothing could shake her calm. And men at the club still mocked her. At matches, opponents still underestimated her. But Sophia had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Silence was stronger. An argument. She didn't need to convince them with words. One day, her shots would speak for her. And when that day came, she promised herself the laughter would stop. For now, she endured the mockery, knowing that each insult was sharpening her edge. Every "you can't" was becoming the foundation. Of her, I did. What they didn't understand was that by mocking her, they weren't weakening her. They were making her unstoppable. Sophia had learned to carry the weight of ridicule with grace, but now it was time to carry something heavier, herself. The world outside the club didn't believe in her. The world inside didn't even look her way. So she decided she wouldn't just train. She would transform. And she would do it alone. Before dawn, she left the house, moving quietly through streets still cloaked in fog. Her backpack held only essentials: water, notebooks, snacks, and her rifle. She liked the solitude. The silence before the sun rose was a different kind of company. It was patient, observant, and honest. No one laughed. No one doubted her. No one could diminish her. The first target she set up was deceptively simple: a metal silhouette at 300 meters. She crouched in the grass, rifle steady, pulse measured, eyes locked. Breath in, breath out. She fired. The shot landed slightly high. She didn't sigh. She adjusted her aim, recalculated wind speed, and tried again. Over the next hour, dozens of rounds left the barrel, each one teaching her something new. Her notes grew longer than her targets were wide. She logged wind, humidity, even minor quirks in her ammunition. Precision was becoming a language she spoke fluently. By mid-morning, the sun rose higher, and Sophia packed up her gear, moving to a new location, farther away from town. She carried her rifle carefully over rough terrain, sometimes climbing hills, or wading through creeks to find the perfect vantage point. Most would have considered it exhausting, but she thrived on it. The effort was part of the training. Strength wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, and spiritual. Every step uphill, every blistered hand, every sore shoulder strengthened her resolve. She began experimenting with positions. Standing was unstable. Kneeling offered better control. Prone was perfect for long distances, but she discovered nuances in each. How to distribute weight, how to rest elbows on uneven ground, how to adjust her posture to account for fatigue over long periods. Each lesson came with trial and error, and occasionally frustration. There were days she would fire hundreds of rounds and still feel she hadn't done enough. Yet she welcomed that frustration. It told her she was pushing boundaries, growing. Beyond them, weather became a teacher too. Rain pelted her face, wind whipped past her, and heat made her clothes stick to her skin. She learned to interpret these elements, understanding how raindrops could blur vision, how gusts could shift a bullet's path, how temperature could change velocity. Each obstacle was a puzzle, and Sophia loved puzzles. The more unpredictable the day, the sharper her focus became. She also began to study equipment meticulously. Her rifles weren't just tools. They were extensions of herself. She cleaned them religiously, adjusted scopes with minute precision, experimented with ammunition types, and even recorded results of every combination. Every adjustment was a step toward mastery. She wanted familiarity so complete that rifle and shooter moved as one entity. Mistakes weren't failures. They were data points. Sophia's evenings were no less rigorous. After returning home, she would sit with notebooks and charts, reviewing every shot fired that day. She calculated trajectories, cross-referenced wind speeds, and charted her errors. Her walls were covered in diagrams, numbers, and reminders. Sleep was limited, because the mind never stopped turning over what she had learned. And yet, despite exhaustion, she felt alive in a way she never had among peers or critics. Her family worried, but she reassured them with quiet confidence. "I'm okay," she'd say. But her eyes betrayed the truth. This was more than a hobby. It was a calling, consuming her every thought. Even when she laughed with friends or participated in ordinary conversations, her mind wandered back to angles, bullet drop, and the perfect shot. Sometimes she would return to the club unnoticed. She watched others shoot, studying habits she could adopt or refine. She noted which competitors adjusted for wind, which panicked under pressure, and which relied too much on luck. The men laughed and joked, oblivious that she was learning more from them in one afternoon than most did in a year. Each mistake they made was a blueprint for her future victories. Sophia also began to understand patience in a new way. Long range shooting wasn't about speed or force. It was about timing, observation, and rhythm. She would spend minutes sometimes hours lining up a single shot. One day, she crawled through a field in the middle of winter, finding the perfect vantage point on a ridge. She waited 30 minutes, then fired, analyzing every factor before the bullet struck the target at a distance she hadn't yet mastered. Publicly, that moment, silent and solitary, felt like triumph. No applause, no laughter, only her heartbeat echoing in her chest that she kept pushing the limits. Distances increased steadily. 500 meters, 700 meters, 1,000 meters. Targets shrank in size, sometimes no larger than a dinner plate. Every success brought confidence. Every failure brought refinement. Her body grew stronger, her mind sharper, and her reflexes faster. She became aware of how her emotions affected accuracy. Anxiety, excitement, or impatience led to missed shots. Calm focus brought precision. She trained herself to remain unflustered, even when the impossible loomed before her. Gradually, she noticed change in herself. Movements that had once been awkward became fluid. Shots that once wobbled now landed cleanly. She could read the wind by the sway of grass, estimate distances by subtle shifts in terrain, anticipate how a bullet would arc over unseen hills. The rifle was no longer an object. It was part of her body, an extension of thought and will. But even as skill blossomed, isolation remained. The men at the club continued their ridicule, and strangers still doubted her abilities. She accepted it. Their disbelief was irrelevant now. What mattered was the discipline she had forged in silence. She had trained herself to outlast every sneer, every doubt, every mocking glance. Sometimes, in the quiet hours just before dawn, Sophia allowed herself to dream. She imagined herself on a national stage, firing at impossible distances with her Barrett MRAD in hand. She pictured the faces of skeptics as her bullets found their mark. In these dreams, the laughter transformed into silence, and the silence into respect. Every repetition in her training, every cold morning, every painful step, brought her closer to that reality. Her progress was slow, but undeniable. By the time she returned home one evening, exhausted and muddy, she no longer feared the club's judgment. She had outgrown the need for validation. The only thing that mattered was the shot, the rifle, the target, and the unwavering focus she could command over both. Sophia's grandfather, who had once guided her first tentative shots, watched from the porch as she returned one evening. "You've changed," he said quietly, a hint of pride in his voice. "Not just in skill, but in resolve. You're becoming what I always knew you could." She nodded, brushing mud from her sleeves. "I still have so far to go," she replied. But for the first time, she felt unshakable. She had turned ridicule into motivation, mockery into discipline, doubt into mastery. Each day of training, carried out in silence, had made her stronger than anyone suspected. Sophia had learned an unspoken truth. Skill is forged in solitude, persistence and patience. Laughter cannot stop it. Ridicule cannot diminish it. The quieter she worked, the louder her results would eventually speak. And one day, Sophia knew she would speak louder than anyone in the room, without a word, without an argument, simply, with the power of her rifle and the precision of her aim. She packed her rifle carefully that evening, checked every sight and adjustment, and walked home through the fading light. The world was still unaware of what she was becoming. But in her heart, she knew the silent training was a promise to herself. That one day, every mocking laugh would be replaced by stunned silence. And she would be ready. Sophia's dedication had finally brought her to a milestone she had long dreamed of. After years of scraping together money from part-time jobs, odd freelance gigs, and even selling items she didn't truly need, she had enough to purchase her ultimate tool, the Barrett MRAD. It was a rifle that demanded respect, precision, and patience. the very qualities Sophia had cultivated through countless mornings, nights, and silent hours alone. When the delivery truck pulled up outside her modest apartment, her heart pounded. The crate was enormous, heavy, and commanding a stark contrast to the small rifle she had learned on. Her fingers trembled as she carried it inside. She carefully opened the crate, revealing the sleek, black frame of the MRAD, its scope gleaming. Under the dim light, every detail was immaculate, engineered for extreme precision and long-range supremacy. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a promise of what she could achieve. The moment she lifted it, she felt the weight differently. Not cumbersome, but purposeful, balanced, perfect. Years of training had prepared her to handle it with skill, and for the first time, the rifle felt like an extension of herself. Every adjustment, every screw and dial, she inspected meticulously. Scope clarity, trigger sensitivity, recoil management, nothing was left unchecked. Her notebooks, already filled with notes from past rifles, would now chart the limits of this extraordinary instrument. The shooting club was the first place. She wanted to test it, but she knew what awaited her there. As she walked in carrying the Barrett MRAD, whispers rippled through the room like wind through trees. Heads turned, eyes widening in disbelief. "Is she serious?" one man muttered. "She's actually going to shoot that?" Another snickered. Laughter followed, muffled but unmistakable. One veteran competitor approached, shaking his head. "You'll never handle that properly," he said. "It kicks like a mule. That's for men with arms, not, well, you." He gestured vaguely at her slight frame. Another added, "Don't waste it. You'll ruin a $7,000 rifle before breakfast." Sophia said nothing. Words had never been her weapon. She only nodded, set up her firing line, and began assembling the rifle. Each motion was precise and deliberate. She mounted the scope, adjusted the stock, and checked every mechanism with practiced care. The club fell silent. For once, no one laughed. Perhaps they sensed that this was not the same girl who had struggled to hit paper targets in the past. Her first shot rang out. The sound was powerful but controlled. The bullet hit closer than anyone expected, even landing near the center of the target at a distance many would have considered challenging for far less advanced rifles. Heads turned, brows furrowed, whispers began, but Sophia ignored them. She didn't need recognition. She needed mastery. Hours passed as she fired repeatedly. She adjusted for wind, humidity, and temperature. She accounted for recoil, learned how to breathe around it, and discovered how subtle shifts in posture could affect the bullet's trajectory. Each shot was a calculation, each hit a confirmation of the synergy between her skill and the weapons. Engineering. Slowly, the club's mockery began to falter. Laughter gave way to tentative curiosity and cautious respect. People leaned forward to observe. Even instructors murmured quietly, noting the precision of her hits. But Sophia wasn't done. She challenged herself further, moving targets farther and smaller, testing her limits. The Barrett MRAD responded perfectly, its engineering amplifying every ounce of her skill. She realized that she had finally found a tool capable of matching her ambition, a weapon that could take her where her training alone had only imagined at home. She meticulously cleaned the rifle after each session. She logged every shot in. Her notebooks, recording recoil patterns, wind calculations, bullet velocity, and even personal observations about her focus and timing. She developed drills to perfect rapid adjustment between targets at different distances. The rifle was no longer simply a tool, it was a partner in her craft, a companion for the journey she had long envisioned. Despite her growing prowess, the world outside the club remained skeptical. Gossip spread, the girl with the big rifle. They whispered. Some assumed her new weapon was purely for show. Others doubted she could ever harness its full potential. But for Sophia, these doubts were irrelevant. She had spent years building skill beyond ridicule, and now she possessed the instrument to prove it in ways no words could capture. She began experimenting with increasingly extreme distances, testing the limits of the rifle and her own abilities. From one hilltop to the next, from open plains to hidden valleys, she found vantage points where she could observe her trajectory, measure the effects of wind, and challenge the MRAD's engineering. Each success reinforced her confidence. Each failure was analyzed and learned from. By the end of each day, Sophia wasn't just tired, she was evolving. Occasionally, the club's veterans came to watch her. They no longer laughed outright, but skepticism lingered. Some offered unsolicited advice. Adjust your stock. Try a different grip. That's too far for someone your size. Sophia listened politely, but her experience and instincts guided her. She had learned long ago that imitation was not the same as mastery. She trusted herself, and increasingly, the rifle validated that trust. Over time, she realized something profound. Skill alone could not define her. Equipment alone could not define her. The true power lay in the combination of the two disciplines. Patience, calculation, and courage fused with engineering brilliance. The MRAD did not replace her. It amplified her. And in that realization, she felt a quiet thrill dot by the time evening fell. She had spent over 6 hours on the range. She packed the rifle with care, checked every adjustment, and carried it home. Her muscles ached, but her mind was sharper than ever. She knew that this was only the beginning. The Barrett MRAD was a key one she had long dreamed of turning. Behind it lay possibilities she could only now reach. That night, she lay awake planning. Distances, angles, calculations, strategies all swirled in her mind like a storm of precision. She envisioned herself on competitive stages, facing opponents who underestimated her, and landing shots at ranges they thought impossible. She imagined the moment they would see her hit the target cleanly, and the laughter that had once filled the range replaced with stunned silence. Sophia understood that the journey was far from over. The MRAD was formidable, but mastery required patience. She would need to push beyond comfort, beyond fear, beyond the limits most people ever considered. She would need to rise before dawn, traverse rough terrain, battle fatigue, and challenge both herself and the elements. But for the first time, she felt equipped not only to face those challenges, but to conquer them. Her grandfather, observing her relentless dedication, smiled quietly. "You've found the right weapon for the right soul," he said. "Now you just need the courage to show the world what it can do." Sophia nodded. Courage wasn't something she lacked. It was something she had built silently, shot by shot, calculation by calculation. And soon she would prove it. The Barrett MRAD wasn't just a rifle. It was a promise, a challenge, a bridge between years of quiet, solitary training and the stage where her skill would finally demand recognition. She didn't need to prove it to everyone yet, but she knew, deep in her heart, that when the time came, the rifle and her aim would speak louder than words ever could, and she was ready. The announcement of the National Long-Range Shooting Tournament felt like a spark in Sophia's carefully cultivated world. Posters on the club's bulletin board, emails from organizers, and whispers among veteran shooters all carried the same message. This was the stage where the country's best marksmen would compete, where talent, discipline, and precision would be tested to the limit. For months, Sophia had trained in silence, calculating angles, perfecting her shots, mastering the Barrett MRAD. This was the moment when years of quiet effort would meet public scrutiny. At first, registering for the tournament felt surreal. The registration desk buzzed with confidence, boasting, and the occasional show-off who eyed Sophia with mild curiosity. When she submitted her entry, some competitors exchanged incredulous looks. She actually signed up? One whispered, "Why waste the air?" Another scoffed, "She's not even close to our level. She'll be gone by the first round." Sophia felt the familiar warmth of ridicule pressing around her, but she ignored it. Words had never been her weapon. Skill was the week's leading. Up to the tournament were a blur of preparation. Each morning, she ran drills, reviewed her calculations, and ran mental simulations of the event. She studied maps of the competition grounds, noting potential vantage points, wind patterns, and obstacles. She ran scenarios in her mind: a gust of wind at 1,500 meters, a sudden tremor in her hands, a misjudged angle. Every variable was logged, analyzed, and addressed. By the time the tournament began, Sophia was as ready as she could be. When the day arrived, the atmosphere was electric. Competitors, seasoned veterans and rising stars alike, filled the field with the confidence of those accustomed to admiration. Cameras clicked, spectators murmured, and judges moved with quiet authority. The air was filled with the scent of gunpowder, leather, and adrenaline. Sophia felt the tension, but unlike others, she didn't let it consume her. She had trained for months, for years, for this exact moment. The first round began with relatively short distances, manageable for even average marksmen. Competitors fired rapidly, some with brash confidence, some with obvious nerves. Sophia approached her firing line with calm precision. She set up her Barrett MRAD, adjusted the scope, and waited for her moment. Her first shot hit its mark perfectly. A murmur ran through the crowd. She fired the second, third, fourth, each one clean, precise, controlled. Whispers turned to astonished glances. The girl they had laughed at for years was not only surviving, she was excelling. Yet Sophia didn't smile. There was no need for validation. Her focus was a blade cutting through the noise dot as the rounds progressed. Distances increased. Targets became smaller, more challenging. Veteran shooters faltered, missing shots by fractions that made the difference between elimination and survival. Competitors' faces tightened. Their whispers became audible concerns. "Who is she?" one asked, disbelief in his voice. "How is she this consistent?" Another muttered, "It doesn't make sense. She's different." Sophia didn't answer. She merely adjusted for wind, recalculated trajectory, and squeezed the trigger dot by mid-tournament. The underestimation that had plagued her entire life became her advantage. Competitors who had mocked her now kept a wary eye, unsure of how to approach her. Judges began to take note of her accuracy, marking her name with interest rather than cursory acknowledgement. The audience, initially skeptical, leaned forward, sensing something extraordinary unfolding. Sophia had entered the arena quietly, but her performance was forcing the world to pay attention. Pressure mounted. Distances stretched to previously untested ranges, testing the limits of her skill and the capabilities of her Barrett MRAD. Targets seemed to shrink with every meter, and environmental factors became increasingly unpredictable. Wind gusts, sunlight, glare, subtle elevation changes, every detail mattered. Yet Sophia thrived under the pressure. Her training in silence, her countless solitary hours of trial and error, had forged a resilience her peers could not match. Between rounds, she observed the competition carefully. She noted fatigue, tension, and mistakes, internalizing patterns for her next shots. Some men whispered, "She's analyzing us like we're the targets." One even admitted under his breath, "I've never seen anyone like her." Sophia remained still, outwardly calm, letting her rifle and her discipline speak louder than words. When the penultimate round arrived, the challenge was nearly impossible for even the most seasoned shooters. Targets were set at extreme distances, requiring split-second calculations and total focus. Many competitors faltered, missing the mark entirely or barely grazing the targets. Panic crept in among them. The pressure was visible in shaking hands and strained breathing. Sophia, however, remained untouched. Every shot was deliberate, her sight aligned, her breath steady. Each hit bolstered her confidence and deepened the unease among her peers. The final round approached, a target at 2,900 meters, nearly 2 miles away. Few had ever succeeded at this distance. The atmosphere was charged with disbelief and tension. Spectators leaned forward, some holding their breath, waiting for history. Opponents exchanged worried glances, realizing the girl they had dismissed for years might now surpass them. Sophia stood quietly, adjusting her rifle and scope. The Barrett MRAD was an extension of herself, calibrated perfectly, ready for the challenge. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep, controlled breath. Months of preparation, years of solitude, every lesson learned in silence, all led to this moment. She exhaled and aligned her sight. Every factor was considered: wind, humidity, temperature, bullet trajectory, even the subtle sway of the rifle against her body. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the field, a singular note of precision. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen. The audience waited, collectively holding their breath. Then clang. The target was hit, dead center. Silence descended, heavier than applause, heavier than laughter. Even the most confident veterans were speechless. The girl who had once been mocked, dismissed, and underestimated had just achieved the impossible. Judges confirmed the hit. Competitors, now visibly shaken, approached her, some extending hands, others simply nodding in respect. Spectators erupted, finally recognizing the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Sophia, however, remained calm. She packed her rifle with care, allowed the moment to settle, but did not bask in it. Validation was not her goal. Precision, discipline, and mastery were her objectives, and she had achieved them in that moment. Sophia understood something profound. Ridicule and doubt had been the forge that shaped her. Every laugh, every sneer, every dismissive comment had pushed her to become extraordinary. The tournament was not merely a test of skill. It was a testament to perseverance, focus, and the quiet strength cultivated in isolation. By the end of the day, she was not just a competitor. She was a symbol. A girl who refused to be defined by others' perceptions. A marksman whose results demanded acknowledgement. A quiet force that reshaped expectations. The laughter that had once filled the range had been replaced by stunned silence. And in that silence, Sophia found her triumph that her journey was far from over. The tournament was a milestone, not a conclusion. But the big tournament had proven what she already knew. Talent, discipline, and relentless dedication could not be denied. Sophia had faced public scrutiny, pressure, and doubt, and emerged not only unshaken, but victorious. As she walked away from the range, her Barrett MRAD in hand, Sophia's thoughts were calm but resolute. This was just the beginning. There were greater challenges ahead, distances she had yet to conquer, records to break, and histories to make. But she would face them all with the same focus, the same precision, and the same silence that had carried her here. For the first time in her life, Sophia wasn't the girl who was laughed at. She was the girl they could no longer ignore. And that was only the beginning. The tournament had begun to take its toll. Days of travel, hours under the sun, and relentless focus on extreme distances weighed on every competitor. Many shooters had already dropped out, their nerves and fatigue overtaking their skill. The murmurs of doubt had shifted to concern. But Sophia, unlike most, thrived under pressure. Years of solitary training had prepared her for exactly this, a battlefield of precision where every shot mattered, and every variable counted. When she stepped onto the firing line for the next round, She could feel the eyes of veterans on her. Some stared openly, trying to gauge if this quiet girl could maintain her composure. Others whispered among themselves, muttering words of disbelief. Even the spectators were tense, sensing that the next stage would challenge both the rifle and the shooter to extremes they rarely witnessed. Sophia didn't flinch. Her pulse remained steady, her breathing controlled, and her eyes locked on the target. The first task was deceptively simple, hitting a target at a moderate distance. It seemed almost easy compared to what she had practiced in isolation. Yet, even this target tested her precision under observation. She calculated the wind, humidity, temperature, and minor elevation shifts. Her rifle was steady, her movements deliberate. Her first shot landed perfectly in the bullseye. Heads turned. Some whispered, "She's consistent." Too consistent. Others exchanged uneasy glances. The laughter of early rounds had long since vanished. The next stage brought increased difficulty. Distances stretched, angles shifted, and crosswinds added unpredictability. Competitors who had once appeared confident began to falter. Shots missed, bullets strayed, and frustration crept into faces once relaxed. The air was thick with tension. Spectators leaned forward, sensing the difficulty, murmuring guesses about who would survive this round. Sophia approached each shot with methodical calm. Years of calculating trajectories alone had taught her the subtle cues others ignored. She read the wind through swaying grass, calculated angles using slight shifts in terrain, and even anticipated how her own heartbeat might influence the bullet. Her eyes tracked the target, her finger followed the trigger, and the rifle became an extension of her body. Every shot was precise, measured, deliberate. Every hit reinforced her focus. Every near miss became a lesson. Competitors began noticing patterns in her approach. They observed her breathing, her pause before each trigger pull, and the meticulous care she gave her adjustments. One veteran leaned over to another and said quietly, "She's analyzing everything, every variable, every mistake. It's like she's 2 steps ahead." The other nodded, eyes wide with a mix of awe and anxiety. Sophia didn't acknowledge them. She never did. Her only audience was the target, the rifle, and herself. The rounds grew longer, the distances extreme. Many shooters faltered at ranges they had once claimed as manageable. Bullets drifted, missed entirely, or struck just shy of the bullseye. Anxiety gnawed at hands and minds alike. Some competitors muttered in frustration. Others shook visibly. Sophia, however, remained a pillar of calm. Her muscles were tired, her eyes strained, yet her discipline held firm. Pressure was no longer an obstacle, it was a test she was built to endure. The audience, once casual, became engrossed. Every shot carried tension. Spectators whispered, "Will she miss? Can she sustain this?" Some held their breath. Others nudged neighbors, pointing at her with wide eyes. Even judges leaned in, making notes, their earlier casual assessments giving way to serious attention. The girl who had once been laughed at was now commanding the room without a word. Sophia's methodical precision began to intimidate the competition. They could feel it, though they didn't understand why. Some attempted to hurry their shots, hoping to regain confidence or intimidate her. Others became self-conscious, adjusting their positions awkwardly. Pressure that had previously been evenly distributed now seemed heavier around her peers. She had never intended to dominate through fear, but her quiet consistency had an effect. By mid-round, the target distances were approaching previously untested extremes, where even the slightest miscalculation could result in failure. Her Barrett MRAD, calibrated perfectly, responded like a trusted partner. She adjusted for every factor. Wind shifts measured by subtle leaf movements, sunlight angles affecting sight clarity, and even minor temperature changes that altered bullet velocity. Each calculation was precise, her hand steady, her posture unwavering. Every shot reinforced a rhythm honed over years of silent discipline. A sudden gust of wind swept across the field. Several shooters flinched. One veteran cursed under his breath as his bullet went wide. Sophia paused for a heartbeat, adjusting her scope, recalculating trajectory, and waiting for the optimal moment. Then she fired. The shot hit perfectly. A ripple of astonishment passed through spectators and competitors alike. Some whispered incredulously, "How did she know?" Others shook their heads in disbelief. Sophia didn't react. She merely prepared for the next target dot. As rounds progressed, the range became a crucible. Each competitor's limits were tested both skill and patience. Some faltered under the pressure, their confidence cracking, their focus breaking. Sophia moved from target to target with unwavering composure, rarely hesitating, rarely erring. Every shot was deliberate, every action calculated. The contrast between her calm precision and the growing tension around her was palpable by the penultimate stage. The targets were nearly invisible to casual eyes, set at distances most shooters had only imagined. Only a few had ever attempted these ranges in controlled environments. Anxiety was almost physical, visible in trembling fingers, tightening jaws, and shallow breaths. Competitors glanced at Sophia, noting her steady demeanor, her unshakable focus. Murmurs spread. She's not just surviving, she's excelling. How? Sophia's training in silence paid dividends now. She had conditioned herself to operate under extreme pressure, not with fear, but with clarity. Each shot was a symphony of calculation and instinct. She adjusted for crosswinds, measured bullet drop with precise elevation adjustments, and compensated for recoil with fluid movements. She had internalized the physics of long-range shooting, her mind calculating simultaneously what would take. Others several moments to process. Spectators, now silent with anticipation, watched as she executed each shot flawlessly. Competitors, despite experience and reputation, struggled to keep up. Some whispered apologies to themselves, acknowledging silently that the girl they had underestimated was now outperforming them. Sophia, however, remained impassive. She had trained not to seek recognition, but to achieve mastery. Finally, only a handful of competitors remained alongside her. The final challenge of the round loomed, an extreme distance target set nearly 2 miles away. Even those who had excelled in previous rounds faced difficulty. Anxiety ran high, tension was tangible. Yet Sophia's focus was unwavering. Years of preparation, solitude, and dedication had forged a resilience that allowed her to operate where others could not. As she lined up for the final shot of the round, she closed her eyes for a moment. Every calculation she had made, every shot she had fired, every day spent in silent training, coalesced into this single instant. Breath in, breath out. She exhaled slowly, adjusted her scope, and focused on the distant target. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. Time seemed to stretch. The bullet flew, slicing through wind and distance. A hit. Dead center. Silence. Spectators gasped. Competitors froze. Even judges leaned in closer, confirming what they saw. The impossible had become reality, achieved not by luck or bravado, but by relentless discipline, precision, and focus, honed over years of quiet work. Sophia stood, composed and serene, her eyes scanning the range, her mind already preparing for the next round. The pressure on the range, which had crushed others, had only sharpened her. She had learned to thrive in it, to turn tension into focus, and to transform adversity into mastery. The rounds ahead would test her further, but now she understood with certainty. No matter the challenge, she had the skill, the patience, and the composure to prevail. As she stepped off the firing line, spectators whispered in awe. Competitors regarded her with newfound respect, though few dared speak aloud. Sophia didn't seek applause. She had proven to herself, above all, that years of silent training had prepared her to excel under the most extreme pressure. The stage was set. The final challenge, the legendary 2,900-meter shot, loomed ahead. And Sophia, calm and composed, was ready. The moment had arrived. The final stage of the tournament was set, and Sophia knew it was unlike anything she had faced before. The target was placed at an almost unimaginable distance, 2,900 meters, nearly 2 miles away. Few shooters had ever attempted it, and fewer still had succeeded. The pressure was colossal, but Sophia had prepared her entire life for this. Every early morning, every hour in the cold, every calculation written in her notebooks led to this singular moment. As she stepped onto the firing line, the atmosphere was electric. Spectators lined the edges of the range, holding cameras, murmuring anxiously, craning their necks for a better view. Competitors exchanged tense glances, their confidence replaced by disbelief. Words of doubt, which had followed her for years, now seemed almost irrelevant. She had become something more than rumors and underestimation. She was a force forged through relentless discipline. Her Barrett MRAD was at her side, carefully maintained and perfectly calibrated. She unpacked it with deliberate care, checking every screw, scope adjustment, and sight calibration. The rifle wasn't just a tool. It was her extension, her partner in achieving the impossible. Sophia's fingers moved with practiced precision, performing every step as though she had done it 1,000 times before. Because in truth, she had. Around her, the crowd was silent, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Competitors whispered under their breaths, some shaking, others simply staring. "There's no way she can hit that," one murmured. Another muttered, "Even the best marksman wouldn't dare attempt it." Sophia didn't react. Her focus was absolute. Doubt, fear, and commentary had no place here. She took her position prone, body flat against the earth, the rifle resting solidly on a bipod. The landscape stretched before her, rolling hills, distant trees, subtle rises and dips. In terrain. At first glance, the target was almost invisible, a mere speck in the horizon, blurred by distance and heat haze. Many would have panicked at the sight, but Sophia's training had taught her to see past mere vision. She saw angles, trajectories, and probabilities. She could measure wind shifts by watching the movement of distant grass and branches. She could calculate bullet drop almost intuitively. Every element of the environment became a tool, not a hindrance. Breathing slowly, she aligned her scope. She exhaled and waited for the moment when all factors would synchronize. Wind direction, humidity, temperature, elevation, and heartbeat. Years of preparation had taught her patience. She could wait as long as necessary. Every second was a calculation. Every millisecond mattered. The crowd seemed to vanish. Only the rifle, the target, and her mind existed. Finally, she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, a sharp crack splitting the air. Time seemed to stretch as the bullet traveled across the 2 miles of open terrain. The audience collectively held its breath. Competitors froze. Judges leaned forward, trying to track the impossible. Sophia's heart remained steady, pulse controlled, focus absolute. The bullet struck. Dead center. For a heartbeat. Nothing happened. Then clang. The metal target rang true. Silence fell across the range, heavier than any applause could have been. Even seasoned competitors were frozen in shock. Spectators' mouths hung open. Judges double-checked, eyes widening. Sophia's hit was confirmed. The impossible had been achieved. The reaction was instantaneous. The silence shattered into gasps, murmurs, and finally, stunned applause. Competitors approached slowly, some shaking her hand, others simply nodding in awe. For years, she had been dismissed, laughed at, underestimated. But now, every mocking voice, every scoff, every eye roll was silenced. She had spoken through action, precision, and courage. Sophia remained calm, packing her rifle with meticulous care, as though the event had been routine. But inside, there was a quiet exhilaration, a recognition that she had achieved what few could even dream of. She had not only hit the target, she had redefined expectation, challenged perception, and proven that skill, discipline, and persistence could overcome every barrier. Her grandfather, standing at the edge of the range, allowed himself a smile. "You've done it," he said softly, pride evident in his eyes. "Not just the shot, but everything that led here. You've earned every moment." Sophia nodded, letting the significance sink in. Years of mockery, ridicule, and doubt had culminated in a single decisive triumph. The crowd continued to murmur, processing what they had witnessed. News crews moved closer, microphones capturing stunned voices. Unbelievable. A 2,900-meter shot. The girl who... Cameras swiveled, spectators whispered, and Sophia realized that her story was now larger than herself. The girl who had once been laughed at had become a legend in real time. Competitors, even those who had doubted her most, approached with respect. Some asked questions about technique, wind adjustment, and scope calibration. Others simply shook their heads, still processing the audacity of her achievement. Sophia answered quietly, modestly, though her calm demeanor belied the magnitude of what she had done. She knew that perfection required humility. Celebration would come later, in private reflection. That night, in the quiet of her hotel room, Sophia reviewed every step of the day. She analyzed her shots, logged distances, wind adjustments, and every environmental factor. Each calculation confirmed the precision she had achieved. She smiled faintly to herself, not out of vanity, but out of satisfaction that her relentless discipline had been validated. Her peers and the audience had seen the result, but they hadn't seen the years of solitude, the early mornings, the relentless repetition, the physical and mental endurance required to make such a shot possible. Sophia had not only conquered the target, but also the internal and external pressures that had shaped her life. Every moment of mockery, every dismissive comment, every doubt cast upon her had been fuel for this triumph. She understood something profound in that moment. Greatness is not merely talent, it is persistence, focus, and the courage to continue when no one believes in you. The 2,900-meter shot was more than a technical achievement. It was a declaration that discipline, preparation, and self-belief could overcome centuries of bias and doubt. By the time the tournament officially closed, Sophia had become a sensation. Articles, social media posts, and interviews highlighted the historic nature of her shot. She had shattered records and expectations alike. Yet she remained grounded, knowing that her journey wasn't about fame. It was about mastery, growth, and personal achievement. As she walked away from the firing line one last time, the sun setting behind distant hills, she felt a sense of completion, but also anticipation. The 2,900-meter shot was monumental, yes, but it was also a milestone. There were new distances to challenge, new skills to refine, and new heights to reach. Sophia knew that the world would remember her name, but she also knew that she was not finished growing. In that moment of calm reflection, she realized something else. The laughter of her past, the mocking glances, the ridicule, the doubt, no longer had any power over her. It had served its purpose, shaping her, strengthening her, and forging a markswoman capable of doing what no one else dared. She had turned every whisper of doubt into silent motivation, every sneer into fuel, and every underestimation into opportunity. The 2,900-meter shot would be remembered. But Sophia's journey was ongoing. The girl who had once been laughed at had emerged not only victorious, but transformed, a living testament to perseverance, discipline, and the quiet power of relentless training. The air was thick with anticipation as the tournament organizers announced the final ceremony. Competitors gathered, spectators leaned forward, and journalists adjusted their cameras. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the girl who had redefined long-range shooting. Sophia walked calmly onto the stage, Barrett MRAD in hand, her presence commanding without effort. She had long ceased to care for applause, but the energy in the room was undeniable. Years of ridicule, doubt, and isolation had culminated in this moment of recognition that, as her name was called, the crowd erupted not in the mocking laughter that had followed her for so long, but in genuine admiration. Whispers of disbelief had turned into applause, shouts, and cheers. Competitors who had doubted her now nodded with respect. Judges approached with official recognition, presenting awards, certificates, and accolades. Sophia's precision, discipline, and perseverance had earned her a place in history. The ceremony highlighted her historic 2,900-meter shot. Video footage played on large screens, showing the seemingly impossible trajectory from rifle to target. The moment the bullet struck dead center was captured in slow motion, allowing every spectator to witness the precision, the calculation, and the mastery she had achieved. Gasps filled the arena. Even seasoned marksmen, accustomed to long-range challenges, watched in awe. Sophia's grandfather, standing among the crowd, had tears glistening in his eyes. He had watched her grow from a curious girl fumbling with rifles into a masterful marksman who had defied expectations. "I always knew she could do it," he whispered. "But seeing her now, it's extraordinary." Sophia smiled faintly, humbled by his pride. Journalists pressed forward with microphones and cameras. "How did you achieve this?" they asked. "What was going through your mind during the shot?" Sophia answered with quiet composure. "I trained for years, in silence, with focus and patience. Every detail was calculated. The rifle and I had to work as one. That's all it was." Her words were simple, but her demeanor conveyed the depth of preparation and dedication behind them. Interviews circulated quickly. Social media exploded with admiration, disbelief, and respect. Headlines read, "The Sniper Queen, Sophia's 2,900-meter shot stuns the nation. Girl who overcame mockery, breaks records in historic precision shooting." And Sophia, redefining excellence and discipline in long-range marksmanship. Suddenly, the girl who had been underestimated for years was a symbol of perseverance and mastery. Yet, Sophia remained grounded. Fame, recognition, and accolades were not her goals. She had pursued mastery, precision, and personal excellence. The awards and media attention were byproducts of her relentless focus, not the purpose of it. To her, the true victory was internal. She had proven that dedication, discipline, and patience could overcome even the loudest doubts. She continued to mentor young shooters who had once felt marginalized or dismissed. Her story inspired many, especially girls who had been underestimated in male-dominated environments. Sophia emphasized one principle above all. Mastery requires discipline, preparation, and belief in oneself. Talent alone was insufficient. Consistency, focus, and resilience were the real keys to success. The shooting club that had once echoed with mockery now welcomed her with admiration. Former skeptics approached her privately, seeking advice on techniques, adjustments, and training methods. Competitors who had doubted her now treated her as a peer, offering respect where scorn had previously existed. Sophia accepted these gestures humbly, knowing that respect earned through action carried far more weight than any words. Beyond competitions, her achievement began to influence equipment design, training methods, and tactical approaches in long range. Shooting. Manufacturers cited her success with the Barrett MRAD, while instructors referenced her meticulous preparation as a case study in effective training. The girl who had been laughed at had now impacted the entire field, shaping future generations of shooters. Sophia's personal journey also reached those closest to her. Her family, once worried by her obsession with training, now celebrated her dedication and resilience. Friends who had once doubted her admired her unwavering focus. Even strangers were inspired by the story of a young woman who had transformed ridicule into fuel, doubt into opportunity, and solitude into mastery. Her triumph was also a personal revelation. Sophia realized that the challenges she had faced, the mockery, the doubt, the isolation, had not hindered her. They had shaped her. Every insult had been a lesson in patience. Every doubter had taught her resilience. Every solitary hour had refined her discipline. By turning adversity into strength, she had not only mastered her craft, but also discovered her own capacity for excellence. The recognition extended beyond accolades and media coverage. Invitations poured in from universities, military training programs, and professional shooting associations, all seeking her insight, mentorship, or participation. Sophia, however, remained selective. She chose engagements that aligned with her values, teaching, inspiring, and advancing the discipline of long-range precision shooting. She refused opportunities that would exploit her fame without purpose. Even as she embraced recognition, Sophia remained the same disciplined, focused individual she had been during her years of silent training. Each day still began before dawn. With precise routines, careful observation, and rigorous practice, she knew that mastery was never complete. There were always new distances to conquer, new challenges to tackle, and new skills to refine. Recognition was temporary. Skill was lasting. Her legacy grew not only from her record-breaking 2,900-meter shot, but also from the lessons she imparted. She demonstrated that excellence is not granted, it is earned. That mockery and doubt are not barriers, but opportunities. That patience, precision, and relentless focus can turn the impossible into reality. Sophia's journey became a blueprint for anyone willing to pursue mastery in the face of adversity. Years later, as she looked back on the journey, Sophia remembered the laughter that once filled shooting ranges, the dismissive words, and the skepticism of those who had underestimated her. Those memories no longer hurt. They fueled pride. They reminded her of how far she had come, how much she had endured, and how her unwavering dedication had reshaped the perceptions of an entire community. In quiet moments, she often reflected on the solitude that had once seemed isolating, but had been essential to her growth. She remembered the early mornings, the endless calculations, the hours spent adjusting sights and reading the wind. Those moments had forged not only her skill, but also her character. Without them, the 2,900-meter shot and the respect, legacy, and recognition that followed would not have been possible. Sophia's name became synonymous with precision, discipline, and determination. She was invited to speak at conferences, write articles, and demonstrate techniques that had once been the secret of her solitude. Her story inspired countless individuals, especially young women, to pursue fields where they were underestimated or dismissed. She proved that mastery is not limited by gender, circumstance, or skepticism, but by the commitment one brings to the craft. Even as accolades piled up, Sophia remained humble. She understood that success is fleeting, but excellence is enduring. Her training continued, her techniques refined, and her goals expanded. Records were broken, but her true achievement was the discipline, resilience, and focus she cultivated along the way. Recognition was fleeting, but mastery, she realized, was permanent. Ultimately, Sophia's journey became a testament to the transformative power of perseverance. From the girl who had been mocked, laughed at, and underestimated, she emerged as a legend not merely for a single record-breaking shot, but for the quiet, relentless dedication that made it possible. Her life became a narrative of resilience, skill, and inspiration, a story that would encourage others to embrace challenges, pursue excellence, and turn ridicule into fuel for greatness. Sophia's final thought as she looked out over the range. One evening, Barrett MRAD at her side was simple. This was only the beginning. There would always be new targets, new distances, new challenges. But no matter the obstacle, no matter the doubt, she knew that with discipline, focus, and courage, anything was possible. And the world, once skeptical and dismissive, would always remember the girl who had transformed every laugh into lasting legend.